Thanks, Sally. And can I just echo a warm welcome to everybody to this afternoon's session. And as Sally said, this is the second session on day one of our summit. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jeremy Porteous. I'm the Chief Executive of the Housing, Learning and Improvement Network, and I'm delighted that our small team has been able to pull together an action-packed week of events for you. Indeed, we've pulled together about 40 expert speakers, and we've got a lot of sessions for you, attracted nearly 600 odd members who are joining us during the course of the week. So a great turnout to listen to a number of really fresh thinking ideas and issues facing the housing with care sector. As Sally mentioned, please do either use social media, either the Twitter handle or the hashtag that appeared on the slide. This year's summit is the fourth we've held virtually, and in fact we've had 12 conferences since we became independent of the Department of Health. Prior to that, we managed the Extra Care and Housing with Care Capital programme and used a learning network approach to support implementation, policy and practice development. And many of you have been part of the HousingLIN over the last 14 or 15 years, and delighted that you're still with us and still continuing to share that knowledge exchange. But before we commence this session, a couple of other things I just want to highlight. First of all, this conference and this summit would not be possible without the support of our headline and associate sponsors. A big thanks to all of you. This sponsorship enables us not to just run the summit, but actually to maintain a free networking platform, communications and networking exchange during the whole year. So again, big thanks to all of you who support the LIN in this way. And in particular for today's session, a big thank you to Lou Drew and her colleagues at Shakespeare Martineau. Again, delighted that you're with us and that we can sort of focus this afternoon on understanding your audience, elevating marketing approaches for housing for older people. And just before I hand over to Lou, if anybody wasn't with us this morning for the session with the Minister, one thing that came away from me was a conversation that Jim from Extra Care Charitable Trust, a resident at Hewenden Gardens in High Wycombe, said. He was really caught unaware about the types of housing options that are available in later life. And had he known, he might have moved along with his wife earlier and made an earlier decision to move into a retirement community. And he talked about not just about the fabric of the building, but how it created a sense of belonging and the community. And I'm hoping those are the sort of things we'll unlock this afternoon with Louise Drew, partner at Shakespeare Martineau, chairing this afternoon's session. So Lou, over to you.
Many thanks, Jeremy, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Just continuing on that point that Jeremy's just made, we know that it is a real challenge to try and ensure that the public understand what retirement living options might be. We've covered on numerous occasions the challenge around the language that we use, and that many different providers call it something different, and that's causing confusion. So today we're going to have a look at how we can potentially market later living in a better way, and perhaps with the benefit of some data which is going to be mentioned, especially by Dan and Simon later on in this session. First and foremost, I need to introduce the panelists that you have before you today, all sector experts in their own areas. So we will be starting with Dr. Carol Easton. She is the Chief Executive at the Centre for Ageing Better. They're striving to make ageing better a reality for everyone. Then I'm followed by one of my own colleagues, actually, Dan Usher, who is an economics director at Marans. Marans being a planning consultancy that's part of the group that Shakespeare Martineau is a member of, and he specialises in housing needs evidence. Then we're going to be followed by Simon Williams, who's the Managing Director of Service Insights Limited. They are a research consultancy in feedback and service performance improvement. And then finally, we're going to hear some real-time experiences from Francis Burrows, who is the Director of Support and Service Development for Orbit. So, enough from me. Let's move straight on to Carol. If you would like to share Carol's slides, Sally, that would be fantastic.
All right, is this working and can you hear me? Louise, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to assume everyone else can hear me as well. So good afternoon, everyone, and really great pleasure to be joining you today. So being Chief Exec of Centre for Ageing Better is really a great privilege. And I feel I'm going to kind of be giving you some kind of background issues to the main theme that we're discussing today. Next, please. So you may well know about the Centre for Ageing Better, and we do have the big ambition. We want to make ageing better a reality for everyone, not just because we're kind of idealists, but because we really know about the inequalities in ageing that this country has, and how those inequalities very sadly are growing. We're a foundation funded by National Lottery Community Fund and part of the government What Works network, both of which you know about. And we don't fit very tidily into being a kind of service delivery organisation or being a think tank. We kind of straddle. So we undertake campaigning and influencing, develop new ideas, policy and practice, and we definitely want to identify good practice and innovation and support that being disseminated. Next. So we are focusing on 3 different areas. The last is the most perhaps relevant today, but I will touch a bit more on the first one, which is developing an age-friendly movement and tackling ageism. Now, you may know that there are already 70 places, local authorities, regions, places in the country that are age-friendly communities, and that's a movement that we're supporting and building, and hopefully are making their environments more inclusive for older people, more friendly for older people. And that can range from quite small things like putting benches in to bigger things in terms of influencing the whole strategy in a local authority. And ageism, I'll come back to that later on because we've just launched a big public-facing campaign supporting work we've been doing on ageism to date. Age-friendly employment, not something I'm going to touch on particularly today, but very much relevant to ensuring that older people can be more financially secure as they head into older age. And then finally, our homes, and trying to ensure that they're accessible, healthy in intergenerational communities. Next, please. So one of the projects we've been working on in partnership with Manchester Combined Authority and the Manchester School for Architecture has been this issue about downsize or right size. Next, please. So I don't know about you, but I get quite angry when I see the headlines of like, if only older people would just move out of their huge, in quotes, mansions and go and live somewhere else, then we'd solve all the housing problems in the country. It's so simplistic and it's so far from the truth. So our research indicated that 4 million people 4 million older people want to move, but very few actually achieve it. And there's a number of reasons. It's not just that they, can't summon the energy. There are really a host of reasons and hurdles put in. And I challenge most of you to say, if you've moved in the last few years, you know how demanding it is. So people might like to, but they won't expect to. And these figures really demonstrate the difference there. Next, please. So this is true. You look at ethnic groups as well. Quarter of people saying they want to move, but very few actually thinking that they're going to be able to put that into practice. And that's kind of figures are even more stark when you look at people with disability. Next, please. So it isn't just the bricks and mortar that make people want to move, though there are some people who obviously it is that they want something smaller. But the wheel on the right shows you some of the other reasons that people who have moved in the last 3 years, the reasons that they've done so. And these are really important to bear in mind. Next, please. So it isn't the kind of, as I say, just the bricks and mortar that motivate people to move. It's their experience of home. And that's why at Aging Better, we always use the word home rather than housing. It's the quality of life that people have in their homes and communities. It's the potential for transport. It's the potential for still being included in their communities, as well as the potential for them, if they do move, to find what they actually need and that they've got the money to do so. So that's why we are saying that there's a lack of meaningful discussion with older people about local housing plans, and that there can really be assumptions made on the kind of immediate need of someone right now, rather than what they might want for the rest of their lives or for the next 10 or 20 years, and how they may want to be engaged with their communities that they've been with for a long time. Next slide, please. So it kind of seems blatantly obvious maybe, but what we're asking for should happen locally is that we should talk to older people. We need a review of the housing mix and does it match people's aspirations, and that we need an age-friendly strategy. Next slide, please. So a slightly different but related issue, next please, is one of the other areas of work that we're focusing on is improving the homes that people live in now. Most of the homes that we have for the next 50 years are already built. And what we find is that people do not have access to independent information, advice, and the work that needs doing in order to make their homes safe. And we are, as you'll see here, campaigning to both national and local government to engage more in this. Next, please. One of the statistics, and I'm relatively new to this, that I find really shocking is that nearly 8 million people living in an unsafe home, more than 2.5 of those are aged 55. And that, is just in itself is terrible, but it makes demands on the individuals, on the health service, on the economics, on society as a whole. Next slide. I won't go into the detail of this, and separately, if you want to know more, the Good Home Hub is something that we have developed as a potential solution in order to make support either to stay put and improve your home or advice about moving available to everybody. And it's the coordination and accessibility of these services that is absolutely crucial. Next, please. So this is a range of activity that we're undertaking at the Centre for Aging Better to demonstrate what's working well already and what people are doing to enable people's homes to be improved. I'm particularly interested in the Good Home Network, which now we've got over 50 local authorities signed up to share practice and try and in an attempt to really improve the offer across tenures to help people improve their homes. Next, please. This is a kind of quick, and I have a feeling I'm running out of time, so this is just a quick kind of indication of one of the projects that we're running in Lincolnshire. Next, please. And again, this is the kind of, from Lincolnshire, who conducted a big survey. They looked at all the reasons what people needed, what the barriers were, and how they'd like to receive advice. And I think, given the theme today, I won't go into detail, but just to show you the detail that they have gone into at Lincolnshire, in case you want to know more. Next, please. I think we'll carry on. I'll do the next one. Just to say on that last slide, just to say that evaluation is really important, and we are delivering that evaluation commission to refine the service so that we can look at how that can be disseminated throughout the country. Now, Jeremy asked me to talk about something that may seem a little bit left field for a moment, which is a new campaign that we've launched to challenge ageism, because one of our arguments at the Centre for Aging Better is that we don't talk enough in this country about ageism, and it underpins a lot of the barriers people face in this country as they age, and that we don't tackle then also the fact that we have a growing aging society. It affects everyone. It impacts on later lives, it prevents people growing older with confidence, and it has consequences for wider society. And the interesting thing about ageism is that it's potentially directed at all ourselves as we get older. And it's not a trivial matter. It really does affect health, well-being, mental health, and social inclusion. Next slide, please. So you may or may not have seen any of these. They've been out in the public domain. Are you ageist? We're calling the campaign Age Without Limits. We have also tried to indicate how the things we take for granted in day-to-day life, like saying to someone you're too old for that, or you can't teach an old dog new tricks, actually is really destructive, because you translate that, you hear that over and over again. It makes you self-limiting. It makes people not offer training in the workplace. So it's not a trivial matter in any shape or form. Next, please. So we're asking people to stop and think about ageism. We're asking them to take part in a quiz. We're asking them to learn more about the real serious impacts of ageism, and also then for employers to take action by either joining our employer pledge. We have an action day coming up on the 30th of March. So there's a lot that everyone can do. No one's got an excuse not to do anything. Next, please. So I'll cover that next one, please. So you might say, well, ageism, that's not really kind of something we think about when we think about homes. And I'm going to be honest, it wasn't the first thing that jumped to mind, even at the Centre for Aging Better. But when I talked with my team about the work we do in homes, they said, absolutely, we really need to think about ageism and homes as well. And I hope you've got other ideas about how ageism and homes intersect. And so these are just kind of some for you to think about, and I'd be really interested to know if they resonate. So seems to me there's an assumption that older people will move into specialist retirement or care homes when they are older. I'm not talking about you, because you will know the reality, but out there in the general public. Reality is 2.5% people over 65 living in specialist or care homes, tiny portion of our population. The consequence of this is that there are too many people currently living in properties that present a risk to their health or present significant barriers to their everyday living. And you will know all the issues about accessibility, about affordability, but also it means that we don't have homes that accommodate the support that people need, and they don't have information about the advice and support that they need to make their homes places in which they can age healthily. So it really does limit thinking if that's the only place we'll be focusing on. Next, please. Another assumption, planning for housing and communities is fit for purpose, doesn't really need to take into consideration the needs of older people or people with other needs. And again, we're exaggerating, obviously, to make a point. But if we do make assumptions about what older people want, and the other risk, and this isn't just true in homes, it's true across the board, is we kind of assume they're a homogenous group with all the same needs and desires, then planning and design decisions are made without reference to the different needs of a population. And that was certainly something that the Manchester project indicated, is that there are very different needs and very different priorities across different groups of older people. So they really do need to be looked at in much more detail in terms of planning, construction, and design. Next one, please. And then, one of my least favorites, there's a frequent narrative in the media that older people own their own homes, and are therefore wealthy and or asset rich, if not cash rich. What that means is that older renters are almost totally absent from public and policy conversation on renting, even though those numbers are increasing. And it also means that older people who own their own home but have limited income, or just even their home may not be an asset either anymore, are not eligible for support, and maybe don't think that they can get the help that they deserve to make their homes safe. So they can't, the heating or the damp or the mold or whatever it is, or the trip hazards, which is a huge one. So just as a reminder, almost 70% of households are headed by someone 55 and over, and we know that over 1 million of those are living in poverty. And again, that reminder that the numbers of people renting are increasing, and many of those will be on fixed income, and that number is going up. And I think that was my last slide. So a bit of a canter through the different issues that I hope have some relevance to the debate today and that we're contending with at the Centre for Ageing Better.
Thank you, Carol. That was fascinating. In some respects, it's a shame we had to go so quickly, because there was a lot of other stuff in there that I'd really like to unpick. I mean, from my perspective, it's that choice bit, that we're not creating opportunities by explaining to the public what their options are at an early enough stage, so they can actually understand what they could, aspire to potentially at some stage live in a type of community that offers much, better benefits for people as they age in place. On that, planning was mentioned there by Carol. So Dan, can we come over to you and explore a little bit about the 2040 report that you've been involved in?
Yep, thanks, Lou. Just before I start, can everyone see that? Is that all on screen? That's fantastic. Okay, so yeah, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you to everyone at HousingLIN for giving me the opportunity to present today on behalf of Marins as well. So my name's Dan. I'm a qualified town planner background, and I'm a director in the Marins economics team. Just a little bit more about me. Prior to joining Marins, I was part of Barton Wilmore's National Development Economics team for just over a decade. And during that time, I'd sort of developed a sort of keen interest in housing need of all types, not least the need for later living accommodation. And as part of this work, we tried to do a lot of thought leadership and look at the latest data that's coming out, demographics and so on. And in the past sort of 12 to 18 months, we've started to see the results of the 2021 census being sort of drip fed to us. And that data is really important. It can provide us with a lot of understanding of all sectors. So there will be quite a few numbers in this presentation, so please stick with me. So all the data I'm going to use in this presentation is sort of a sneak preview from a upcoming report that Marins are publishing. It's called Housing Need 2040, Opportunities for Developers. Please do scan the QR code on the right there, and then when the report goes live, you'll get that to your inbox. And in this report, we basically analysed the most recent ONS and government data to predict housing needs in England to 2040. Like I say, the most recent data available, we used 2021 census, we've used population projections, and we've split this data by housing type. It includes affordable housing, student accommodation, first-time buyers, and of course, later living that we're going to focus on today. And what we see, I'm sure not unsurprising to anyone, is that we see an overwhelming need. The data sort of points to an overwhelming need for later living accommodation throughout the country. So in total, for the 2040 report, we've analysed more than 7,000 pieces of data across all local authorities, looking at different regions and so on. And this has been used to determine where the data suggests we need to prioritise the delivery of later living. Obviously, there's a big pressure across the country, but we're sort of using this data to sort of show where it appears to have the most sort of need, and it's enabled us to look at questions, as you can see on the screen there. How fast is the later living population growing in each region, and then down to local authority level. Carol mentioned, there's the role of under occupancy in households. What does the data show us in terms of that, and how likely are these figures likely to increase or up to 2040? So just a few sort of general figures to begin with. What we've seen is that we've looked at under occupation, and what we've done here is the way the data is presented, it provides under occupancy by 1 bedroom or more, or 2 bedrooms or more. What we've thought, well, people probably want to have a spare room, so for family and friends visiting and so on. So what we've looked is at the 2+ category, so where households have at least 2 bedrooms which are unoccupied. Across England, in the 66+ age group, which is the age that the census provides us with for this data, over half of all households aged 66+ are under-occupied by 2 or more bedrooms. Just looking generally at the population, age 66+, it's 18% of England's population in 2022, which is the latest population mid-year estimates we have. And that is projected to grow to 23% by 2040. That's obviously subject to new population projections, which potentially we're getting next year from the ONS. And using our own projections, we project that under occupation in 2040 will be 4.5 million homes. So a large number of homes there. Regionally, what it's shown us is that the North, East and the East will be the oldest regions. They will be the only regions which will have a larger later living population than the broad sort of first time buyer age group of 25 to 44. So bringing this down to sort of a more local authority level, this shows you the local authorities with the highest increase in that 66+ population between now and 2040. And I think what this table shows is there's a range of different areas. You've got urban areas like Nottingham and Slough, coastal areas like Southend-on-Sea, sort of Northamptonshire, which is predominantly rural with a number of smaller towns. And it's right across the regions from Isle of Wight in the far south to Shropshire in the west, Barnsley further north, and Peterborough in the east. So large increases there in the later living population. And so what we've done in looking at the later living population as well is tried to draw out themes, and one of these themes has been coastal living. We've focused on this as one theme because historically, there's been a trend for people in older age groups to leave towns and cities in favour of the coast. And I think this trend, as of the 2021 census, is well illustrated by the map on the left. And that basically shows the proportion of the overall population, which is age 66 and over, and the warmer colours are those authorities which have the highest proportions. You can see the vast majority of those in 2022 are coastal, particularly sort of along the south coast there, and then into the east and northeast as well. And then the table on the right then takes that up to 2040 and shows which authorities are projected to have the highest proportion of the highest increase, in the later living population by 2040. And you can see there's very significant increases, with the biggest increases along the southern coast, really, right along that coast, stretching from Folkestone and Hythe in Kent in the southeast to Cornwall in the far southwest. So that's the coastal living theme. The next is urban living. It's important to emphasise that it's not just the coastal areas that will see big increases. As you can see on that left table, the increase that shows the increase in later living population by 2040. Again, there's a number of different urban areas across the country there. Nottingham right at the top there with the largest increase in the East Midlands, right down to Brighton and Hove in the south. Authorities in the northwest and the Midlands as well. And on the right, this is the figure, which is what proportion will the later living population be of the overall population in 2040, according to the projections. Again, these are more coastal predominantly. We see Sefton up there in the northwest, quite a few authorities in the northeast as well, and then Plymouth there as well, quite high up down in the southwest. So there's an obvious increase in not just the coastal areas but urban areas as well, as people of all ages would like to live in the urban areas. So the third thing we looked at was connected living. So these are areas which have good transport links, and they might be priorities for people that want to that enjoy travel and want to get to different places within the country in as short a time as possible. You can see Swindon is projected to have a 50% increase in the later living population by 2040. Swindon's obviously a major rail hub for the southwest and Wales, and then obviously towards London as well. It's a quick route into London. And then you've got an authority such as Slough, where the Elizabeth line has just recently opened, which provides very quick access to Heathrow, and then all the way through London and out the other side. So there's the projections show that these areas as well, these sort of more commutable areas, will have a large increase as well. And then the final theme is country living. And sort of moving to or just remaining in the more rural locations is always an option, and a very attractive one, particularly for the later living population who have a real thirst for the outdoors. As you can see on the left there, Shropshire is very high up, bordering Wales, and Shropshire will actually have England's largest actual number of people in that 66 plus age group in 2040, according to projections, and will have increased by 50%, 48% by then. And then on the right there, this is going back to the under occupation point, and what we found here is that it was predominantly these sort of more rural areas where the under occupation was projected to rise the highest amount. As you can see there, Surrey Heath, almost a 70% increase in households which have at least 2 bedrooms, which are unoccupied, and a number of other authorities there which are predominantly rural. So that's sort of a summary of the data that we've looked at in that Housing 2040 report. So I think of all the types of housing we've analysed as part of that report, we believe that the later living sector shows the greatest growth potential. I think it's no secret that we all know that it's an ageing population in the country. I think there's no doubt the impact that under occupation has on the wider housing crisis too. It's there's for example, it's estimated that for each bedroom added to the retirement stock, 2 to 3 are released in mainstream housing. So that is an important point. And we think that this really presents strong opportunities for developers to invest in the later living market and create links between housing associations, investment funds and local authorities to offer a greater sort of choice to the consumer in terms of location and style and the facilities. But obviously we need greater collaboration across organisations. Our view is that perhaps a later living use class would be pretty revolutionary for the sector in planning, but that we need proactive investment, both public and private, and a bit of a national shift in focus. There's a lot of focus on first-time buyers, but maybe last time buyers as well, and recognising that not one size fits all, which was something that came out of the House of Lords report meeting housing demand, which was published a couple of years ago, really emphasised that, you know, there needs to be a range of options available to the later living sector. And I think importantly, we can't ignore the data, that some of which I've presented here. And if we're going to meet the needs of the population in 2040, this shows how we need to starting to build the right homes today, really. So that's enough for me, and I'll hand back to Lou.
Thanks, Dan. That was excellent. Really emphasises how huge the issue actually is. I mean, from my perspective, just kind of like looking at it, from every challenge there should be an opportunity, and if we could resolve the things that Carol was talking about, and look at building homes from a more positive perspective for the older generation, and actually get out into the public what good housing in later years could actually be, then hopefully you might then find that there were more developers that were prepared to kind of get involved in building better and safer accommodation for older people, and actually then fill it more quickly, because of course that's one of the marketing challenges, is it can take quite a long time to actually sell it, and then create void costs. So brilliant, and no doubt there'll be questions on that later in the Q&A. So we're going to move on to Simon, please, next. A bit more data, so hold on, folks. It's going to be okay.
Okay, I was just going to share my screen. You can hear me okay, can't you? Okay. Yeah, that's great. So let me try this. Okay, so yeah, okay, so I think you can see my screen now. I'm Dr. Simon Williams, Managing Director of Service Insights, so independent research consultancy. I also do bits of work with Leeds University Business School as well, in information management and operations management, but worked in social housing for 25 years plus. So today I want to talk to you about this concept of forecasting the customer of the future in social housing. And I'll just walk you through very swiftly, because I have a fairly tight time frame here, I'm told. And obviously look at the background to the research design, the research findings, summary of key arguments, obviously in Q&A. But as I say, I'll whisk through this with you. So bear with me 1 second. Okay, so first of all, the background to the research. My area of interest primarily is around service performance improvement, and I'm really particularly interested in the different perceptions, if you like, between organisations within social housing, and also tenant perspectives, and how they don't always overlap in terms of sort of service design, service delivery, and so on. And I suppose this is coming more to a point, isn't it, with the draft versions of the consumer standards, which are being signed off relatively soon, and are particularly linked to the engagement with tenants aspect within the transparency, influence, and accountability standard, as seen on the screen. Also, when considering customers of the future in social housing, just to say that some of the challenges we have in social housing do relate to wider global delivery of service in wider sectors. So this is just one example from the Journal of Service Research. It's obviously an academic source, but it's an international 4-star journal, peer-reviewed. And every 5 years or so, these authors tend to look at what the research priorities might be in the coming 5 years or so. And it's just interesting to see that they're referring to managing and delivering service in turbulent times. I think within social housing, we often be referred to perhaps as being turbulent or continually turbulent, and lots of challenges as we go through. But it's just interesting to note, even though this is dating from 2021, they're referring halfway down. I'm not sure if you can see the mouse on screen for this, but I've just pointed to that at the moment. But about halfway down in this abstract, it's talking about the first two priorities being about technology and changing nature of work. We can't avoid technology in a sense because of the fact that it does have such an impact on changing approaches to service delivery. And then the second one being technology and the customer experience. And again, I'll draw on that a lot about the customer perspective, the lens of the customer. And then also just to pick out the next two priorities, again, it refers to about halfway down, resource and capability constraints. Do we have those in social housing? Well, yes, so relevance there as well. And then finally, the customer proactivity for well-being. Again, it's, that focus on well-being is important, and really the focus of what the sector is about. In terms of the research design, I just want to tell you a little bit about Delphi research. So we're obviously looking at the theme of the customer of the future. A way of future forecasting is through this Delphi method, and it's developed through the Cold War in the 50s. And it's a research technique where you get an expert panel together, and then you basically hit them with multiple rounds of questioning to identify answers for a specific area of interest. So that could be a really broad area, and you start broad and then bring it down through several rounds to determine and identify the answers. And for this particular piece of research, we were looking at this time period of 3 to 5 years. You could do Delphi's for 10 years, for example, or even longer. But we wanted to very much have it linked to practice, really, and those operational strategic planning cycles. Any less than 3, potentially you could do it, but it's trying to look forward, isn't it? So it's that balance between long-term strategic thinking and that link to practice. And I'm very much an advocate of linking research to actually influencing practice wherever possible. So the panel comprised of about 35 experts, split into 4 groups. So policy, technology, ops management, and importantly, tenants as well. So with policy, for instance, if you think of the likes of large membership organizations in the housing sector, several of those were involved. Technology was large international software providers, again, not naming any names. Ops managers were CEOs, heads of service, directors of service, and then frontline staff, because the frontline staff could have those keys to understanding the future rather than the strategists, and tenants very much so. So again, the ones actually receiving the service. I'll just move on fairly swiftly, but obviously the aims within this research were to look at what the customer of the future may be in social housing in that time period of 3 to 5 years, and actually what may social housing providers need to do to evolve and change in order to meet those customers' future needs. So those are the sort of core themes. I'll just whisk through the research findings. So as sort of hinted at, we did 3 rounds within this research, starting broad and trying to narrow it down. So this first round, we were looking to the expert panel for their perceptions of the future, and we framed it within these sort of contexts here. So needs and priorities, challenges, opportunities, barriers, and evolving technology, which refers back to the Journal of Service Research as noted. So first of all, just going through these systematically, needs and priorities. Basically, as you'd expect, I suppose you could say, the needs and priorities was an increased demand for social housing properties. Yeah, is that ever going to go away? It's always a demand there, and that's totally understandable. There absolutely is. But it's good to see that that's recognised, of course. Improvements in the quality of properties. And then interestingly as well, a third highest theme within needs was this focus on energy consumption, linking to the cost of living, and very much as a means to reducing day-to-day energy costs. In terms of challenges, again, that cost of living affordability issues emerging, meeting increased housing demand and supply, that provision of broad spectrum of housing to meet different needs, and property quality, of course, that's featuring in there as well. From the opportunity side of things, 2 perspectives here, service and also property. So for service, there was a strong feel that technology had a role as a solution to improving service delivery. And from the property side of things, I guess you could almost look at it from a property technology side of things. There's a provision of sustainable homes, so that very much that volumetric modular construction of properties. So addressing environmental agendas, but also new techniques, new innovations, if you like. Importantly as well with the opportunities, customer culture, really, really key to this, sort of central to the findings, really. Moving away from that contractual relationship of a tenancy agreement, and all the language associated with that and the behaviours, if you like, and move more to a sort of cooperative approach. And the consumer expectations, move away from that perception of 9 to 5. We're all working with organisations or customers of other organisations who are 24/7 really through online services. So it's moving away from traditional methods. And again, really important that return to core social purpose, back to customers, back to the focus on communities. Really, really key themes coming through. Barriers to this, I'll just scoot over these policy and economic perspectives, of course. Cost of retrofit for those environmental aims. From the service perspective, lack of skills, the adoption for automated services or technology adoption. And then specifically for the technology side of things as well, there's that longevity of technology, as well as data security, the longevity of technology, because it's always moving forwards, lack of awareness of customer needs. And that's really important. Again, that focus of actually not providing technology to just sit on top of services and change it through that way because it happens to be new technology. It's something which actually customers need or enhances their experiences. And just to touch on this, because technology was a question in there, simpler forms of tech, such as apps, and importantly from property, smart home devices, that Internet of Things, renewable energy, and off-site construction, as mentioned. So for round 2, we took this to the next stage and tried to identify aspects which would make the greatest impact in practice. So just to pick on 3 areas here. So looking at the top 3 for the non-technology service offer, again, you can still see themes coming through about that relationship, the tenant relationship with housing providers or the housing officer, greater emphasis on community engagement, and co-design, that principle of involving tenants in the service design and services going forward. From a tech side, again, online services, nothing outrageously innovative almost. It's almost like the basic core thing. So online services, digital inequality being addressed and considered, and smartphone apps as well. And then sources to help achieve improvements, culture change. So that's very much the operational level and also governance levels as well from board down, and how that permeates through the organization. Increased desire for innovation. Can we be more innovative? There's lots of reasons why not, but at the same time, there's a desire there. Sharing of best practice and also challenging stigma in social housing came through too. And then finally on the round 3, ways to achieve the improvements. How can you actually do that? So there's these 4 themes coming through from the property, non-tech, tech, and tenant empowerment side of things. So firstly, I'll just pick out on some of these on the property side of things. So improving the property standards, you've got things like obviously understanding the quality of existing stock. Do we really understand that? Do we mirror blindly sort of stock condition from one property to another? Decent home standards, quality assurance measures, using technology as an enabler as well. Is there a role for Internet of Things, smart devices in homes? Co-creative practices. How easily can staff challenge standards as well? Can they really take issue with homes if they're not up to an adequate standard? Can they actually change that? There's the insulation, eco side of things again there, second from the bottom, and really importantly, delivering the basics well, and that permeates again throughout the research. The second theme, really important one, again, cross-cutting is for this area. So not non-technology service offer, providing that human-centered service. So reinstating a single point of contact model with plenty of in-person contact, putting customers at the heart of the organizational culture, and being willing to try new approaches as well. Tech, we sort of mentioned about this. It's nothing, too innovative. It's getting the basics right, really, I guess. And importantly, picking out that element there, the final bullet point: digital approaches should not replace human. And quote saying that can yield massive benefits for improvement, but shouldn't be a replacement for real conversations with tenants, including face-to-face engagement. And then fourthly, with the ways to improve tenant empowerment, provide that ongoing engagement, understand evolving needs of customers as well, of tenants. Importantly as well, second and third links somewhat together. So how do you demonstrate links between tenant voice and positive change? What's actually changed as a result of hearing tenant feedback, and what tenants are saying en masse, and use that feedback as a formal stage in policy development. How can you demonstrate that? How do you show the link that elements of feedback from tenants has been taken into consideration when developing policy context? And also ensure that providing feedback is simple. It doesn't need to be difficult. It doesn't need to be odorous. It doesn't need to take forever. It's just trying to collect it the right way, ask the right questions, and apply it. And it sounds simple, but it's not obviously so straightforward, which is why lots of organizations do struggle with it. So as a quick summary, that sort of really works my way through that very, very fast. But there's 8 points just want to summarize really for the customer of the future in the next 3 to 5 years in social housing. So the first one is that the sector may fundamentally remain the same. Okay, well, social housing has been in existence for many, many years, and it's unlikely to suddenly disappear overnight. It's going to really continue to be there for those without many options or limited options. Demographics will evolve. There's going to be elements of changes within that over time. But the argument here is that the customer of the future will not only be households on low incomes, but may also include households on middle incomes as private rent sector rates continue to grow, and the prospects of the younger generations buying into homes may become more futile. Third one, more diverse customers. So the customers, in the next 3 to 5 years, going to be more diverse, from the most vulnerable with the fewest options to those who traditionally have had a choice of tenure. Fourthly, higher expectations for service and homes. So this is around that theme of, future customers will likely have higher expectations than current longer standing customers. They're going to compare their landlord to other service providers outside of the sector and expect faster, more efficient and more effective services. They won't tolerate bad service. They're going to use social media, whistleblowing to take issue of resolving problems and take organisations to task. Fifth, added pressure to delivering quality products and services. So, from that perspective, hardship and poverty, it's always going to be a dominant characteristic, but so will activism and the pressure to provide quality products and services. There's going to be more pressure to deliver that from the operational side. Sixth, greater need for accountability. So, that concept of future customers will be more aware of rights and will hold the sector accountable. And that's obviously coming through more from the regulatory type approaches. Seventh, tech is expected as standard. So obviously that's coming through the younger population more generally. They've got full expectation that communications will be available via apps and smartphones, as well as other methods, of course. But they won't stand for unfair treatment. And then finally, tenant voice, increasingly will influence service design. And that's around the fact that customers will have a voice in design and will use their voice to provide feedback and expect change as a result of it. So as a whistle-stop tour, that's brings me to 20 questions or the next speaker.
Thank you, Simon. If anybody's got questions for Simon, can you just pop them into the Q&A box and we'll deal with them at the end once Francis has finished his spiel. I think that segues very nicely into what Francis is going to talk about, because a lot of what I heard there, Simon, from you was about collaboration and actually treating older people with respect and dignity by actually asking them what it is that they want, rather than making, an assumption that this is what we need to provide you and you'll put up and shut up, which I think, as we all know, even with the current generation of older people, that's not really the case. So we need to get better at actually understanding what it is that we need to be building to give them the choice. So thank you very much. Francis, I know you've got some great stuff around how you do make retirement living a bit more appealing to people, and how you can get people to understand it perhaps at a younger age as to what those options are. So can we just go onto yours, please?
Okay, great. Thank you, Lou. And it's been really interesting sort of listening to everybody so far this afternoon as well, and sort of the common themes that are coming through around sort of what people have been finding and all the assumptions that people make. So going back sort of to 2019, when I first joined Orbit, one of the first things I started to do was to look at the whole portfolio around sort of all of our independent living schemes, what the homes were like, what the services were like, and doing that radical thing of actually going out and asking people what works for you as well. And we spoke with about 1,200 people through that process in terms of what they liked about their home, about the scheme, what worked, what didn't work, and then taking that to the next stage, going out and talking to older people within our general needs homes and finding out, firstly, what did they know about our independent living service, which on the whole was not very much as well. And now I've also gone back. They've just done another piece of research. We spoke with 820 general needs customers over the age of 65 over the last few months, again, to find out about what their aspirations were. Had they ever thought about moving, and if so, what was it they actually wanted to move to as well? And using all of this information to try and then put together the right homes in the right places and create a much better pathway and the right kind of breadth of support services that older people want as well, rather than going by assumptions and what people think that they want as well. So I think firstly, it was about sort of going out and sort of looking at all of our existing schemes to really put forward the right case for investment around that. So we had agreement from Orbit centrally to fund about 4.5 million to do general improvements. So we've been able to put in place new furniture, redecorate communal areas, and a basic range of improvements like that. We've created a template, again, working with a core group of customers to design that, to make sure that all of the schemes were of the right kind of standard, but also where can we improve the quality of people's homes within them. So we've been able to take out all of the bed sits from the portfolio so that people have got their own self-contained accommodation, because at this point in the 21st century, we shouldn't have people in their 80s living in bed sits, sharing bathrooms, things like that. So taking out and standardizing the portfolio and improving the quality of spaces for people was that starting point. But then also, how do we maximize the use of the land that we've got? Because we've got some places where there's high demands, but there was lots of sort of disused spaces and poorly planned spaces as well. So again, working with architects and working with our development team to improve the quality of those individual schemes, while we then put forward the right case to be able to then invest in new homes as well, but in the right places, looking at what's the need within those local areas, but what people wanted as well. So going back to sort of that research, looking at our particular demographics, again, there's lots of crossover with what's with some of those earlier presentations. So where we've got particular concentrations of older people in those coastal areas around Kent, Sussex, Norfolk, Suffolk, and then in the rural areas in Warwickshire, again, we've got a lot of people there who are potentially struggling within their existing homes, but they don't know what those options are. So out of those 820 people, about 18% currently said their home doesn't meet their needs. So that was about accessibility, bathrooms having baths in them, stairs that they're unable to get up and down, but also struggling with upkeep as well. So it's not necessarily that the home was too large, but it was harder to manage for them as well. So interestingly, affordability actually came quite low for those people. But it was much more around their particular needs now, but also that worry about their changing needs. So declining mobility, for example, was a really strong theme that came through for people. So the ability to have somewhere that was that had level access bathrooms, step-free access into the properties themselves, but also lifts as well instead of having stairs. All of those things around access came through incredibly strong. And then also in terms of those people wanting to stay, about 60% of people said they're happy in their home, they want to stay where they are. About 15% said they wanted to stay where they are, but they needed some sort of adaptations to stay there. And then there was about another 15% who said they actively wanted to move to an independent living scheme, but they didn't know the process as well. So much richness coming out of this information around how do we create that right kind of housing pathway, so that we're starting to introduce what actually the options are for people and giving people more choice and more control at different points. So they might start thinking about it at 60, 65, thinking that I'm going to need to move, but planning that in a really structured way, and then starting to think about how do they also engage with schemes and with our properties in different kinds of ways. So the next part of our strategy, and looking sort of ahead around sort of our aging well approach, is that it's not just about general needs housing and retirement housing. It's about how do we blend the entirety together around that and extend services and extend support so that everybody within our general needs homes is able to access a broader range of support and services. So it's about using the independent living schemes as community hubs for older people. So again, I think it sort of picks up some of the themes that came out of what Carol was saying in the first presentation, that it's about sort of how do we make more age-friendly neighbourhoods and make society overall more age positive. as well. So using those schemes so that we can reach out to people so that they can come in and take part in activities. We've been working with some local authorities so that we've been able to provide additional sort of care and support services within the schemes that people can come into and access. So we've been having weight management services, falls prevention clinics, so linking in with all of those other people who are out there to then provide a better and more easy range and an easy access for people to come into them. And that way it's starting to create that better understanding of what actually the schemes are and what these properties are. So it's not the care home down the road or that sort of that scary place that people don't quite understand, because they're starting to come in and starting to access those services and start to build those relationships and friendships with people who are already there. And that then starts to generate that interest. And what we've seen in a number of properties where we've been already doing this for the last couple of years is that we filled those properties where previously they might have taken longer to fill. So it certainly helped us from a business perspective, but also the outcome from a community perspective and from a well-being perspective for people has been absolutely phenomenal like that. So people said, we didn't know that this was here, but once they started to come in, they realized the value of that scheme in that community, and they wanted to become a part of it. And then by freeing up those general needs homes, again, it's also enabled families to move into the appropriate larger sort of 2-3 bedroom accommodation that they needed. So it's a win from many different levels if we can get that pathway right. But it takes a long time for people to really think about what works for them and how to create that right kind of approach. So it's also about having the right aids and adaptations policy so that we can provide those adaptations for people who want to stay where they are. We're also using more around assistive technology. We've got digital lifelines, plus other kinds of assistive tech that will help people to stay while they start to think about what that move might look like for them. And then also doing sort of the other outreach services around digital engagement. So how can we also support people to use technology more effectively so that they can also stay in touch with family, which then has that impact on their well-being, and also more around financial support as well. Because we've had a lot more people within our general needs homes saying that they needed more advice around sort of benefits maximisation and making sure that they were getting the financial support that they really needed around that. And then the last point I really sort of want to talk to is about an experience we've just had down in Bexley in South London, where we had an independent living scheme called Bushy Court. And there was a disused wing that was adjoining the property that had been empty for about 7 years. And we got the planning permission and the investment to convert that empty space into 8 new flats, which then became part of the scheme. So by doing that, we've been able to spread out the service charge cost across 58 rather than 50 schemes. There's a positive impact for people as a part of that. It's created more people coming into the scheme, creating a bit more sort of a new community and bringing in some additional people. Again, it's having a really positive impact there. But even better than that is that we wrote out to older people over the age of 65 in 3-bedroom homes in general needs properties in the borough. And we had a really positive response back. We had far more people saying, yes, we want to come and have a look. So we held a couple of different open days and we filled all of the flats from the first open day. And we've also got a waiting list now of people who want to move into the scheme whenever anything comes vacant as well. So we're now starting to get much more interest by doing that. And it shows that approach by just letting people know that it's there, changing that sort of marketing terms like that has really helped people to then come in and start to benefit from that property. So even those people who are on the waiting list, and they are now able to come in and they're accessing support and services and participating in activities and becoming a part of that community. So then when they get to that point of having a property that they can move into, they've already got those relationships, they've got their friends within the scheme, and it already starts to feel like home as well, while also freeing up that family home within the borough. So that approach absolutely does work when you've got that right number of people within the area. And then I think the follow-on part of that is more around that partnership as well. And actually, how can we extend this out so that we can work more closely with other providers, local authorities, social care teams as well, so that we can create that really sort of holistic approach within a particular area and deliver the right kind of homes. And the other piece of work at Bushy Court that we've been doing is about the rest of the refurb of the scheme, so that we've replaced the lift, we've replaced all the windows, we've put a new digital ward and call system in, and it's having a full redecoration of all the communal spaces, new furniture in the lounge. So everybody will be benefiting from that, not just the people who have the new flats, but everyone's been having a range of improvements to their homes as well, while also doing energy improvement works and new solar panels to make it a more energy efficient building, which will help to bring down costs and improve environmental performance. So all of those things together, again, it's been a huge amount of work to sort of try and piece everything there, but by having that sort of unified approach and thinking about the properties externally as well as on a scheme by scheme basis, well, has absolutely paid dividends for that by creating that right approach. So the next stage of what I'm doing is to sort of put down that pathway into being sort of a more clear process, and then it's about going out to our tenants and really sort of talking them through that so that we can be more targeted and show people what those range of options are and take away some of that stigma around what retirement housing actually is like. And then by coming in and experiencing it prior to that point of moving in, again, it changes the way that perception and makes it something that people want to be a part of. It makes it a really positive experience for them. And then by capturing more of those stories, we'll be able to then sort of replay that back out as well. And that's the way that we'll make change. And that's, I'm very happy to show people the schemes, show the work we've done, and share anything around that, because the more we can collaborate, the better it's going to be for all of us. So I hope that's been a useful insight into some of the work that we've been doing. But again, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Francis. That was fascinating. That was really good. Some people are putting comments which are kind of questions as well in the chat box. So can I just make sure that everybody puts any questions that they've got into the Q&A box rather than the chat box? But I'm just going to pick up on one point that's been popped into the chat box, where someone who's listening today has said that the problem that they've got with trying to access activities in care homes is that they are nowhere near any transport. Our borough has started providing services in a care home, and for me to access that, I've got to walk significantly, and that's quite difficult if you don't have mobility. What is the answer, I wonder? I just from Francis, from your perspective, you weren't talking about care homes, where you were talking about later living kind of places that are, I'm assuming, have got much better infrastructure.
Yeah, so that's thing. So all of the ones I would talk about were our sort of independent living schemes. So they're sort of, to use sort of the slightly old-fashioned term, it's sheltered housing or extra care schemes as well. So the way that we've built most of those is that they're part of much wider sort of orbit estates. We've got a lot more where they're sort of town centre locations, and part of our criteria for any new development is that they've got to be really accessible by public transport as well, but also how can we link in with other local services that are provided. So in some areas, again, because we operate over such a wide area, it really varies by locality. So some areas have got really good sort of community transport services, others less so. But we do struggle with some of the more rural properties as well, though. So particularly in sort of the rural Warwickshire, where we've got schemes and villages, again, we find it much harder to provide some of that access. But where we do have those neighbouring properties, again, doing the outreach work within just a close village has benefited. But I really understand the problem that from that comment, though, that if it is more isolated, it's really challenging. And that's why I think, again, it goes back to policy and society, thinking, how do we really value older people and make sure that services are integrated, and what can we do to improve accessibility as well?
No, absolutely. Carol, have you got any thoughts on that?
No, only that, obviously, as I touched on in my presentation, we consider homes as separate from communities at our peril, in terms of the issue of transport, for example, which actually, when you talk to people, is kind of often comes first on the list, even before their homes, in terms of what living is like where they are. So I would just say, completely understand why that's raised as an issue. And just actually, not in response to your question, Louise, so forgive me, but I think we risk ourselves talking about older people as other. We're talking about ourselves. We're talking about what would we want when we get older? What, it's kind of, it's not other people. I'm going to be 70 in a moment. I think we have to accept that we are talking about people and the range of desires that people have. And you know, homes that work for families, for people with disabilities, for people with other challenges in their lives, work for older people as well. And it's just a plea, I think, that we bear that in mind when we have these conversations.
I completely agree with that. And one of the things that I'd written down here is as a question, we will get onto the three questions we've got in the box in a second. And this is probably to Carol and potentially Jeremy. So get ready, I'm going to ask you as well. Whenever I'm talking about the kind of like the sector, the later living sector, everyone has got a personal story. So everybody's got either an aging parent that hasn't, you know, moved house and it's going to become problematic, or it might be with younger generation, it's their grandparents, and they're all very aware of the fact that there is no solution or perfect solution as to how they can help them, because they care and they don't want to see people deteriorating, close family members deteriorating in a home that's not suitable. My question to the panel really is, why is that not penetrating into more general housing strategy? Because we've all got personal stories and none of us want to see it, and yet nothing seems to change. Don't know who wants to go first.
Shall I kick off?
I think it might come back to one thing. Shall I go? For me, it like you say, it's a big question, and I think it comes back to ageism. It's like we don't think about ourselves as we age. We don't build homes. Why is it that we're still fighting for accessibility standards on new homes? I don't get, I'm quite new to this sector. You've probably all been at it longer than me. You tell me, why do we not build homes that have easy access, that you can have a wheelchair that can turn around relatively easily? Why isn't that standard? Even some of the conversations we've had at the Centre for Ageing Better, and we, Jeremy will know much more than me, but, why are we still banging our drum? And why is that legislation sitting on a shelf somewhere now, when actually even the builders say, if you bring it in across the board, then that's an equal playing field, right? If you make it nice to have, then it doesn't make us competitive anymore. So I think there's things like that, and I fear that housing, homes, has not been a priority, whatever colour government we've had for a very, very long time, and that mix that we need and the investment in our communities has been sorely lacking. And we have a responsibility in the sector to keep raising the profile and demonstrating the damage that we're doing. And to everybody as they get older, like you say, the options are not there. Someone put it in the chat box. It's all very well saying, we've got over occupation, however we define that. And I would please ask Dan to bandy those figures with care, because they get totally misused very frequently. Is that younger people can't afford them even if they were empty. So it's, and we've got streams of empty properties, certainly in London where I live, and no one's talking about those. So I think it's part of a bigger political landscape. I think I'll stop ranting now, Louise. I may get
No, that's fine. Absolutely fine. Jeremy?
I think there's two issues here for me. One is that we need to move away from thinking about warehousing older people. We need to think about everybody as a citizen and making sure that we've got the appropriate housing choices. So Carol's absolutely right, and her presentation talked about the ageism that's out there. But there's actually real challenges for people living with disabilities, as the current inquiry from the DLUC committee, select committee, is looking at, in terms of access, adaptability, affordability. So I think what we've got to think about is much more around age inclusion. And actually, as Carol picked up, and I think as Dan and Simon alluded to, is that because we've got such a lack of choice, we warehouse because we then create very strict eligibility criteria. We haven't talked about things like, choice-based lettings, but is there actually a lot of choice out there? The reality probably is no, unless you're very fortunate to live in a location where there is an abundance of supply. But I think what Dan's and Simon's presentation have also demonstrated to me, and Francis as well, in terms of delivering, is actually the type of spatial planning we need to better understand what those markets are. We need that intelligence, we need the data, we need to overlay that with the tenant's voice and draw on that intelligence, that business intelligence, because ultimately what Francis was saying was that, we need to make sure that these products are viable, not just for operators, but for people to afford to live there as well. So that's, I think that's some of my issues around trying to tease some of that out.
Thank you. Has anybody else got any comments that they want to make before we move on to another question? No? Okay, that's fine. So sort of along the same theme, this is probably one that Francis might need to pick up. Why hasn't the development industry woken up to the fact that we require more kind of housing for older people? They still stick to the standard house types that are not more adaptable to later living. I mean, Dan, as a planner, have you got any view on that? Because you know what the developers are kind of like seeking to put applications in for.
Yeah, it's a tricky. I'm sort of a step removed from this topic really, because we're sort of not really putting in the applications ourselves. It's our colleagues in the planning teams. So it's probably a little bit difficult for me to comment on that. I'll be honest, Lou.
Okay.
Yeah, probably not the right person for that one.
Francis, have you got any view?
As always, Lee, that's it. Yeah, that's it, very much so on this one. I think a lot of it's just down to money as well. So the trouble that I found when we've been looking at potential sites for new development for older people's housing, it's always hard to stack up, because when you factor in communal spaces, that's thing, thinking about what the right kind of layout is going to look like, they always end up costing more, and we can't bid the same amount for land. So we often lose out either to sort of the main sort of volume house builders a lot of the time, who'll then build larger blocks of flats where they can get more bang for the buck essentially and get a better return from their investment. But also internally, we have that same problem, because the development team will say, yes, we could do that, but actually we would get better value out of that site if we build the standard house types and the standard blocks around that. So there's always that sort of internal struggle, because we've got to run a business at the same time. That's the thing. There's a part that's the charitable objectives are great, but if we also don't get the return that we need, we're not going to be able to build anything. So I think it's also about a planning issue, and how do we work with the local authorities who actually really commit to say, we want to do this. So when you look at some of the sort of the councils out there where they've really taken a proactive approach and thinking about what they need from their particular programs, and how can they then identify sites and designate that for extra care housing, that's thing, or making sure there's the right proportion of bungalows and supporting it that way, is a huge benefit around that. And then that housing strategy and that thing, and identifying what local housing need looks like, needs to explicitly say older people's housing is really important. We need to ensure that they are held to account in terms of adaptable properties, because we need more homes for people of all ages with disabilities, for example. That's thing. So why don't we build more step-free properties? Why don't we have the right kind of homes around that? A lot of it is down to market forces, and actually housing shouldn't just be about a market. And as housing associations, I think we also have that duty to provide the right kind of homes that are adaptable and really understand the needs of our tenants.
No, absolutely, completely agree. I mean, I think that moves on quite nicely to another of the questions that we've got in here. Hopefully, Dan, actually, you might be able to help with this one. To what extent do you think that people's preferences should factor into how local authorities assess need for seniors housing? How do you see this as being implemented? At the moment, assessments of need seem to be based on historic supply, but do not grapple with the idea that there may be a need based on the types of services and amenities that residents want. Very good question.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, actually, and I think it's really important, to be honest. I mean, what we've seen in sort of more general local needs assessments and in the planning world, and what policies require, is quite often they'll require a survey of sorts to sort of draw out, you've got your overall numbers and that's all well and good, like the question sort of says, but you need to even just with general needs housing, a lot of planning policies now require a housing survey, which actually goes out into the local area and can ask a range of questions, which is sort of agreed with the local authority. And some of those can be related to what, they can be very detailed and very specific. So, I mean, maybe that's the way that this would need to go, is that you obviously have your assessment of need, and then you've got your numbers, but also I can see these housing needs surveys as part of like neighbourhood plans and so on, that can be a little bit more specific and far-reaching in sort of the more sort of qualitative elements of what the design needs to be. So I mean, I think that's a really, really good point, and probably one that it'd be good to see something ideally sort of nationally put into policy about how that can be addressed, because it's really important. Yeah.
Can I add, perhaps, Louise, that the work that I referred to in Manchester that we did on called it right sizing, they did a big survey there and then followed that up, and it's really important to invest time in reaching groups who maybe wouldn't know the survey was there. So I think that's the challenge, is that it's not just saying, okay, we've got this many people over the age of certain, so we kind of know what the needs are. That's clearly not good enough. There's a real investment, I think, that has to be made in saying, we will find that we've got different groups of people within this community, and there will be some who are really going to maybe have to think about sending someone out to knock on doors or do something very different from, the local authority just saying we're doing a survey. People won't, those that you want to hear most from probably won't complete it.
Yeah, I've got to say I agree with that as well. I mean, it comes down to how you can reach people, doesn't it? Like you say, quite rightly so, you can't just send out a survey and expect people to necessarily respond to it without, giving them a bit more. So, it's the investment in time, I think.
Often as well, you can, just to chip in, that those sort of seldom heard groups could come up with more innovative answers. It could be the solutions there which we haven't really thought of or touched on, and that can often be the way.
Yeah, I think I agree, and often it's that sort of soft information that I think you were sort of alluding to in your presentation, Simon. Things like, the loneliness that many people experience in later life, that doesn't automatically translate into a housing target. We need to think about the broader well-being, the health and well-being, and perhaps it's not just thinking about the housing landscape, but also that integration with health and social care, to think about where does that integrated care partnership perhaps try and unlock some of those solutions.
Thank you all. Probably just about got time for one more. Possibly one for you, Francis. Is there an issue in the sector where later living developers are not sufficiently invested in customer engagement and co-design to deliver homes that customers want? Does the deficiency of later living homes delivery result in a focus on need rather than want?
The short answer to that is probably yes. I think that the more we need to do to really think about what's the actual offer that people really want that will engage them, because a lot of the models that we've got are based on sort of the old school sheltered housing that was more popular in the 70s, but actually, is that really delivering what people need and what they want at the moment? So how do we think a bit more creatively around the types of homes? What kind of flexibilities that people want around how they live, and what do we really mean by communal living and providing the right kind of services? Because I think there's a lot out there. I think there was a comment about sort of creating ghettos almost for older people as well, which again isn't what we should be doing. Is about how to have that right kind of pathway, and what's the range of services that we can also provide. So using these locations as a community focal point. So if you want to move in, great, but also if you don't want to move in, but you still want to access services, then that's also fine. But we need to have the structures in place that enables that to happen as well, because again, a lot of that keeps coming back to funding, and the development is all about how do we make sure that these schemes can add up? And once you start to factor in, well, if we're doing these additional services and that might need a bit more communal space and we're going to need an office and all those things, it's where that starts to tip the balance as well. So if we go back to sort of the basic point around engagement with people around what they really want, what they really need, there actually potentially could be some radically different ways that we design these kinds of schemes, the kinds of locations that we put them in as well. And that's where we might be able to do more sort of co-location with other kinds of services, which will also help. And how do we do more that's around intergenerational work as well? Because it's not just about having all of the older people over there and all of the first-time buyers over there. It actually, that's not what a community is. But we need to understand all of the issues that people have got around sort of loneliness, isolation, poor well-being, because the majority of people who live in our properties in the independent living service are single people. And I think a lot of the time they come to us after a partner has passed away and they're feeling really isolated. And that's why the main driver for moving, they want to be with other people and a part of that, and they want to be with people they can relate to. So that point around sort of older people coming together is really important, but also how do we try and have that wider community benefit as well as a result of it?
Yeah, it's just like Carol said, isn't it? Kind of lumping a generation together as though this is what we're going to give them because we think that's what they want. And it's such a diverse, all generations are diverse, aren't they? So why is housing not diverse?
Yeah, well, if you look at the breadth of people, so we've got nearly 4,000 homes within the independent living portfolio. The youngest resident is 55, the oldest is 106. So within that, you've got a massive range of people. That's it, and different backgrounds. That's it. We've got people who have experienced some really tough things within their lives. There are people who come to us because they're living in abject poverty. That's the thing. They need all the support that they can get just to be able to move in and just to live basically. And other people who have sold a property and are downsizing, that's the thing, moving into the shared ownership property. So the social spectrum is really significant within that. We've got very diverse backgrounds, and it's very different group of people in Bexley, for example, compared to in Stratford-upon-Avon. So we really need to understand all of those different elements of people, their backgrounds, their aspirations, and that customer engagement piece will help us to then create the right homes in the right places that then become communities.
Thank you very much. Sorry, go on, Tom.
There's a nip in. I was going to say, it sounds to me like there's a need for further research in this area. What's the customer of the future for the older person's housing, etc. There you go. Just thought I'd mention it. Thank you.
On final plug. Thank you, Simon. Jeremy, then we've pretty much hit time. Shall I hand back to you? Still on mute. Someone had to do it.
Well, dear, sorry. I'm going to just to pick up quickly on Simon's point to say that is a subject matter that the Older Persons Housing Taskforce is tackling at the moment, and it is due to report around the summertime. So hopefully we'll have a little bit more of the indicative findings from that. But I know that your piece of work, what Dan has highlighted in terms of the data, as well as the information that Carol and Francis have offered this afternoon, are sort of really rich in terms of the range of detail that's out there. So thanks ever so for all your wonderful contributions. So I thank Louise for chairing it so expertly, and the teams behind the scene, Sally and Jerome, who you can see, and Alice, who isn't with us visually as well, for making this possible. Some of the issues that we've been touching on this afternoon are going to be picked up. Some of the planning issues will be picked up in a session later this week with John Rouse, who's the lead officer at Stoke Council. Again, which will also be the host of the Office for Place, which is going to be looking at issues around placemaking and planning in the future as well. So again, please do join us for future sessions this week. But in the meantime, there's one final slide to say, if you haven't joined the LIN before, please do let us know if you have a topic you'd like to talk about. If you want to support us in other ways, you can do so either through corporate sponsorship or indeed involve our team in helping you to better understand your local markets. And finally, again, thank you all the sponsors today, in particular Shakespeare Martineau, for making this session possible. Have a great afternoon. I hope I'll see some of you tomorrow morning.